Well, welcome to Session 11, Job-Based and Person-Based Structures. Now that we have identified what people do in specific jobs, which is job descriptions, and what traits or characteristics are needed by those people, job specifications, we must determine how to value those jobs. How much do we pay for what people do or for those traits and skills people possess? One way to look at it is if we pay for tasks performed, we use job-based structures, and if we pay for skills and knowledge people possess to do those things, we use person-based structures. In this session, and in these two chapters, we will identify the variables to be considered when making the decision as to how we will value the jobs and the traits and the characteristics of those in the jobs. The text identifies two methods to evaluate jobs, either by looking at job content or at job value. Content is defined as the work performed and how it gets done. Value relates to contribution to organizational goals. The authors also point out that in addition to content or value, the external market, government regulations, and individual negotiation also contributes to value, which ultimately relates to how much a position or individuals in that position are paid. It is also possible and quite common to use more than one plan in a single organization. For example, hourly positions may be evaluated based on content, while managerial positions may be evaluated based on value. In most organizations, the compensation system, or how we pay people, is anchored by a base pay system that identifies jobs and places a value on those jobs relative to each other and the outside marketplace. For example, an electrical engineer position may be valued higher than an accountant based on contribution to the organization and relativity to the outside market. An electrical engineer may be valued more than a mechanical engineer due to organizational contribution and the outside market forces. The VP of sales may be valued higher than the VP of HR based on those same factors. It doesn't mean that all incumbents in the higher valued positions are paid more, but that they have a potential to be paid more. Individual pay is determined based on experience, history, and a number of other factors. But the pay potential of those individuals are determined by the pay grade they occupy within the pay structure. And this session presents the advantages, disadvantages, and methods to decide if we will base that structural value on tasks performed, job-based structures, or traits possessed, person-based structures. All of this will be much clearer after the next session. However, it is important that you understand where we're going with this. What factors should you consider in making this important decision? And it is an important decision because it will form the base or anchor for our compensation system. On this base, we will add incentives, bonuses, etc. And this decision also determines if our structures will be based on more objective criteria, tasks performed, or subjective criteria, traits and characteristics possessed. Remember our brief discussion on subjective, objective issues previously? I'll go into more detail in this lecture and try to frame that issue in practical terms. So let's make the leap to apply the data we obtain through our job analysis to actual jobs. Let's decide how we will value our jobs so we can then build our base pay program. And from that base pay program, we can build our entire compensation structure to ensure that we are spending our money wisely and effectively. Session 11. Before we try to discuss job-based or person-based structures, it is wise to define what we mean by structures. Structures are, in the traditional sense, a table that includes pay grade or pay level, minimum, midpoint, and maximum. Each pay grade or level includes a particular job or group of jobs, and incumbents in those jobs will be paid within the limits established by the grade or level minimum and maximum. I'm sure that's as clear as mud. So maybe an example will do a better job of painting this picture. This is an example of a pay or salary structure. It's a simple example in that it includes only 4 grades and levels. Structures may include 10, 15, 20, or any number of grades or levels. And any number of jobs may be included in each grade. Each grade in our example includes the following jobs. Grade 1 is Assembler 1. Grade 2 is Assembler 2 and Forklift Driver. Grade 3 is Quality Inspector and Material Handler. And Grade 4 is Maintenance Mechanic and Electrical Technician. The structure defines that the minimum we can and will pay a forklift driver is $9,500, the minimum of a grade 2, and the maximum paid to this job would be $14,500, maximum of grade 2. That same logic applies for all of the other positions in our structure. To put this in perspective, we are trying to end up with a base pay structure on which we can build our entire compensation system. Our entire compensation system may consist of base pay, incentive pay, bonuses, sales compensation, merit pay, across-the-board increases, etc. We can be quite creative in how we pay our people, and how we pay our people to a certain extent determines how effective and creative they will perform. Of course, there are many factors that contribute to overall performance of individuals, but pay is certainly an important one. But it is safe to say that all creativity is for naught if base pay is inadequate, chaotic, confusing, or inappropriate. It's hard to incentivize angry or confused people. Needless to say, developing the components of our base pay system is important. Broadly speaking, the critical steps in developing this important organizational tool includes: determine what people do, job analysis; document what people do in jobs, job descriptions; determine what it takes to do those things, job specifications; conduct a job evaluation to determine how we value the jobs we've identified based on content of the job, what is done, or based on the value, the contribution to the organizational goals. Number 5 is design pay levels and structures to organize and display those values. And number 6 is place jobs into various pay grades to define minimum and maximum individual pay. We have discussed steps 1 through 3, and now we will take up step 4, placing a value on the jobs we have identified. Keep in mind that value is different for different folks. It's subjective. I wouldn't give you 2 cents for a ticket to the Super Bowl, even though I'm an NFL fan. But some people are willing to spend thousands for such a ticket. It's the same in organizations. While working for RCA Corporation, we valued electrical engineers highly. One of the managers came into my office complaining one day that one of his best engineers had just received an outside offer of over $20,000 more than we were paying him. The manager complained that we were not paying engineers enough. Now, I had sound data that we were among the highest paying organizations in the nation for electrical engineers, and I had a lot of such data. When I inquired about who made such a ridiculous offer, I had never heard of the company. It was a very small, privately held organization. Moore's research revealed that they only had a few engineers on staff, and engineers were an important part of their business. Gaining a good engineer was critical to their success, and losing an engineer could be critical to their survival. Therefore, they were willing to pay handsomely to obtain and keep such talent. We, on the other hand, had hundreds of engineers on our staff, and paying one person a ridiculous salary would cause great internal inequity problems. Furthermore, with so many engineers on staff, losing one was not a critical event for our company. Good engineers were important to us, but not critical. Same job, same skills, different values based on different business situations. How do we place a value on a job? RCA engineers and other positions were valued primarily based on job content through a point system which translated into a pay grade which determined the minimum and maximum engineers performing specific responsibilities and tasks could make. We used this system to gain some equity and consistency around engineer pay. The small organizations who stole our engineer were obviously using a person-based or value system. Their pay was not as restricted as RCA, and therefore they could pay over $20,000 more without creating internal issues. Person-based pay plans look at value to the organization or pay people based on skills, abilities, and or knowledge a person acquires that is relative to the work. I've always called this pay for skill or pay for knowledge. An individual employee was paid the base for a job if they learned an established array of skills or possessed an established set of knowledge. They were paid more if they required additional sets of skill or knowledge. Let's put it first in terms of an auto mechanic for a pay for skills example. The individual would earn the base pay for the job if they possessed the skills to do simple work on the engine, change oil, change belts, etc. They would earn more pay if they possessed an established set of skills to work on the transmission. They would earn more pay if they possessed the skill to do body work. And this progression would continue until they had acquired the skills to work on the entire automobile. That would define top pay, or the maximum that could be earned for that particular job or occupation. And they would earn that top pay regardless of if they utilize those skills or not on a regular basis. Merely having the skills and being certified as having the skills would create top pay. Let's look at pay for knowledge in terms of human resource professional, non-managerial positions. If an individual possessed the knowledge to be an HR generalist, in other words, general knowledge of HR, they would earn the base pay for that position. If they acquired an established set of knowledge in training, they would earn more money. Acquiring knowledge in compensation would earn more money. Acquiring knowledge in budgeting or negotiation may generate more pay, etc. These examples clearly define pay for skill and pay for knowledge. Person-based pay may take many forms, but the examples I have given are common examples and clearly differentiate pay for skill from pay for knowledge and content or job-based pay. Job-based pay calls for an evaluation based on the work to be performed and how it gets done. Required tasks are listed, weighted, and value is placed on each. The task required in the job and the value of the task contribute to the evaluation of each job. In my structure example above, the job of quality inspector is valued higher than the position of forklift driver. This higher valuation resulted from the analysis that indicated that tasks performed by quality inspector job were more complex, difficult, or critical than tasks performed by a forklift driver. Therefore, the potential or maximum pay limit was greater for the quality inspector. The valuation was based on the content of the job rather than the knowledge, skills, or the contribution to organizational goals. Job-based pay plans pay people for the job to which they are assigned regardless of the additional skills, knowledge, or abilities the individuals may possess. With job-based pay, a good football lineman, who's also a good basketball center, will not have more pay potential than a good football lineman who is a bad basketball center. On the other hand, under a pay for skills scenario, a good lineman and a good center would likely be paid more if it was established criteria of the organization. The text points out that job-based pay structures are widely used in manufacturing and other environments where work is highly repetitive and job skills and tasks can be broken down into defined activities. Person-based pay plans are used in complex environments where teams are prevalent. Such pay systems provide a great deal of flexibility in assigning and completing work. It is important that you understand this distinction. It follows that if person-based pay plans can provide flexibility, job-based structures can create limitations. To put that in everyday terms, have you ever heard the phrase, "I'm not doing that because it's not in my job description"? Welcome to job-based structures. Person-based structures allow a broader range of duties, responsibilities, and tasks to be assigned. It also follows that person-based structures are more subjective and job-based structures are more objective. Now, let me harken back to my final thoughts from the last session and connect job analysis to our current topics. In my final thoughts, I lamented that job analysis is a necessary process and important, but it is basically data collection. And once we have this data surrounding what people do in the organization and what the characteristics and traits they need to do these things, we can go to great depths to determine our value of these activities. I also lamented that this analysis can get away from you. What exactly do people do? Specifically, what tasks are accomplished? How much detail do we need? I once asked a relatively high-level manager to develop a job description for a position reporting to him that we are trying to evaluate. He submitted a job description that was about 15 pages long. He detailed everything except bathroom breaks, and I think he would have detailed that, but the details grossed him out. It was way too much information for any job description. When I questioned him as to why so much detail, he indicated that his assumption was that the longer the job description, the more important the job. And the more important the job, the higher the assigned pay grade. Details win, and volumes of details win more. Not true, but not an unusual assumption. Now, that's not an example of a bad manager lying. It's an example of a good manager trying to make a somewhat subjective task objective. One way to make it more objective is with more detail. And one of the problems with job analysis is that we fail to accept the subjectivity and strive to great lengths to objectify the job analysis process. That subjective-objective battle also carries over into job evaluation and trying to find the correct value for each position and incumbent. I realize that the text goes into great lengths to explain the processes that attempt to objectify the data, and to some extent the processes described do add some objectivity, but the data is still soft in many areas. The authors confirm that subjectivity as well. So try as we may, objectification of job analysis and structure is not fully possible. Subjectivity and bias are realities in the process. Let's take a second to explore objective versus subjective data and information. Bear with me through the explanation and some examples, because at the end, there is a lesson I learned a long time ago, and if you disagree with the lesson, it at least provides some food for thought. The objective-subjective dichotomy is not only important in the topics we are discussing, but in many other areas of business and our life as well. Our goal seems to be, in all walks of life, to utilize data that is more objective in our decision-making. Our assumption is that objective data is more reliable, and there is some truth to that assumption. However, we hope that objective data makes the correct decision actually jump off the pages and drill deep into our minds so that we know what to do without doubt. Objective data reduces, and we hope eliminates, the risk and the doubt in decision making. It follows then that we also desire to utilize subjective data less often in decision making because it is less reliable. Subjective data is messy. It follows further that we want to take that subjective data and turn it into objective data when possible. If not totally possible, we want to make the subjective data as objective as possible. Once again, we want to mitigate or eliminate the risk associated with decision making. When you are pulled over by a police officer while driving in a 35 mile per hour speed zone, you don't really want the officer to say, "I don't know how fast you were going, but it looked like more than 35 miles per hour, and I would suspect it was more like 50 miles per hour. You want the officer to say, "I clocked you at 52 miles per hour in a 35 mile per hour zone." Your heart may drop because you know you're getting a ticket, but at least you know it's justified. When your doctor tells you, "Based on what you are telling me, I think we should have open heart surgery," you will probably request additional tests, and a lot of them. You don't want that decision made based only on the information you subjectively communicated and the doctor subjectively interpreted. I recently had the misfortune of receiving a diagnosis of cancer. My doctor explained that there are 2 treatment options for my cancer, and each has positives and negatives. He explained one option and sent me to another specialist to explain the other option. Both doctors made it clear it was totally our decision, my wife and I, and they would not attempt to sway us one way or the other. We read books and articles and watched videos and researched on the internet to the point I couldn't remember what I had read, watched, or imagined. We were desperately trying to turn the subjective data we received into objective data so the right decision would jump out and relieve us from the responsibility of making a decision we may regret. I finally realized, and so did my wife, that we have to decide based on the combination of objective data and subjective data we had. There was no clear-cut decision. The right course of action would never jump off the page, no matter how much we read, studied, and analyzed the data. We knew that we would make a decision and then take the appropriate actions and reactions to make it the right decision. In other words, it would become the right or wrong decision based on what we did after the decision was made and not before. And it would become the right decision based on the actions we took to make it right. So I chose one course of action and never looked back. I chose one course of action and we made it work in the right way. Guess what? No regrets. Now, while going through the treatment, I questioned the wisdom of my decision and at times wondered if it would have been less painful or uncomfortable if I had chosen the other option. But my wife and I managed the discomfort and other situations that arose and managed them successfully. We made the right decision even though a substantial part of the data was subjective. By the way, I mentioned that I had the misfortune of being diagnosed with cancer. I had the great blessing to have overcome that diagnosis. I'm fine now and certainly blessed by God through the experience. The lesson is simple, but at times elusive. Having 100% objective data over which to make a decision is great, but rare. At some time, you must choose and then make the decision work through your subsequent actions. Why is this important enough for us to consider here? Objective data is information you can see, hear, smell, and otherwise observe for yourself. Subjective data, on the other hand, is information you believe or feel but can't confirm in any concrete way. Now, I'm sure you all understand that, but it needs to be clarified to further explain my conclusion. Not all useful data is objective, and to make decisions based only on objective information is something computers do, not humans. I stated when making selection decisions that it often comes down to choosing between the final few options, and that decision is made from the gut. Gut decisions are subjective, at least partially, but that's not necessarily bad. So how far do we go to objectify information? How much time, effort, and money do we spend trying to make subjective data more objective? It's a great question, and one that applies to job analysis and structures specifically. And that realization leads me to offer some advice that applies to these processes and others in HR and business as well. How far do we go, or should we go, to objectify data? It's my observation that the more we try to objectify data beyond a reasonable point, the more complex the process becomes and the more difficult it is for people to understand. And because of that, the more unclear the data becomes. When I criticized spending too much time on the structure and objectifying data, I included myself in that criticism. When I worked at RCA, another HR person, who was also named Willie, imagine that, and I developed a performance appraisal system for salaried, exempt, and non-exempt employees. It was meticulously structured with questions related to actual job requirements and included questions to ensure managers were being truthful. The questions led managers to a numerical value for performance, which could then be used to analyze company-wide performance and to benchmark performance of individuals and all employees. Sound complicated? It was. It was also about 10 pages long and required 2 hours to fill out the forms. It was a real slick system. Unfortunately, it was too long and too complex to have any real meaning. Managers didn't understand it, employees didn't understand it, and the only people who did understand it was Willie and Willie. Although it missed the point, it wasn't totally a waste. I learned a great lesson. See, you can even learn things when you're stupid. I learned that some things can't be made completely objective and shouldn't. Human subjectivity is a good thing. Formulas work in math and engineering and in the sciences. Formulas can be useful guides in dealing with humans, but can also get in the way of good decision making. Because good decision making is all about the gut, communication, and reacting to the subsequent situations and events that emanate from that decision, don't be afraid to decide. In the example of performance management, managers already know who are the good employees, who are the bad employees, or who are in the middle. That's the point. Is the employee good, average, or bad? The system Willie and I developed was a system that would make engineers and scientists proud, but left employees confused and managers frustrated. Now, not trying to objectify data is not the ticket to success either. Where is the happy medium? Ultimately, we are trying to identify job responsibilities and describe jobs for two reasons. First, we want to use the information to judge if candidates possess the traits and skills to perform the job. Secondly, we want to value those traits and skills to determine how much we should pay for those traits and skills, particularly relative to the external marketplace and other employees internally. Perhaps a pertinent question to ask when trying to objectify data is this: are we trying to make the data objective to lead us to a better decision, or to prove a decision we've already made to be correct? Let me translate with an example. The football coach knows that player A is a much better player than player B. Player A is faster, stronger, and smarter, and more experienced. Also, player A has more of the intangibles such as motivation, spirit, and leadership. So the coach decides to keep player A and trade player B. Makes sense, right? The coach may have reached this decision based on statistical analysis of data, surveys, and other players and coaches, and a number of other assessment methods. Some of this data is very objective, but data on spirit and motivation and leadership, etc., is much more subjective. What if everything was equal except for this subjective data? Which player would the coach likely trade, and which player would be retained? Obviously, all objective things being equal, the coach would retain the player with the superior spirit, motivation, and leadership. Such are the decisions that businesses must constantly make. Often the subjective data provides a tipping point in selection, promotion, and other critical HR activities. And try as you may, you never will be able to totally objectify motivation, spirit, and leadership. Don't waste time trying. Embrace subjectivity and embrace your instincts and make a decision. Now, I'm sure there are many scientists, engineers, and accountants heading for the exits. Let me reiterate, I'm not discounting striving for objectivity, nor am I discarding the usefulness of objective data. I'm merely saying that beyond a point, trying to objectify data becomes harmful. It actually has the opposite effect. It makes the resulting programs and decisions more complex, more time-consuming, more difficult to understand, more impractical, and contributes to inappropriate and erroneous decisions. Recognize the reality of subjectivity. So once we finish valuing our jobs, where do we go from here? We use the data to help us develop structures so we can maintain consistency in our pay program across the organization and through time. Once again, our base pay program is important because it is the base that supports all of our other monetary activities that provide incentive and reward for our employees. Ineffective or unfair base pay renders all other pay creativity inefficient. Once again, the organization will spend a lot of money shooting itself in the foot, and that's never good.